I also hear an excuse of that, well, if there wasn't such pervasive racism, then we wouldn't need critical race theory. And people like me, they would accuse of caring more about critical race theory than I do about racism. And of course, I'm part of the problem because of that. And these are all like axioms. They're not arguments. Like, you can't argue against them because they're all self-certifying. And so, because if I say anything, then again, it's because I am part of the problem. And if I have to ask, then that just indicates that I'm the reason why critical race theory exists, because of ignorant people like me. Can you speak to any of that confusion?
Yeah, I mean, it does. It's a very wolf in sheep's clothing kind of situation. I've also, I guess, fairly famously in Christian circles referred to it as a Trojan horse. And in fact, I say it's a Trojan horse full of bureaucrats. So it's usually busybodies who want to set administrative policy and set up your training programs for new recruits. But anyway, it comes in with under two guises, one of which is that it's sophisticated academic theory, and therefore you don't really understand it. You don't understand how sophisticated or nuanced it is. You don't know what the detail, the definitions, details. And so since you don't know just how sophisticated it is, you must misunderstand it. But they explain quite clearly, if you read enough of the theory, you start to see they explain quite clearly that to have engaged with critical race theory means to have engaged with a critical race consciousness. In other words, you have to believe it before you can understand it properly. So everybody who doesn't believe it doesn't understand it properly. Then you get that self-affirmation there. But because it looks like a scholarly academic theory, critical race theory itself sounds scholarly and academic, it gives off this impression that it's smarter than it is, rather than just complaining about race and racism all the time in ways that are often either exaggerated or wholly fabricated. Secondly, as you said, it plays off of compassion, and it is extremely good at making the case that people who disagree with it must not care, or in fact care about the wrong things or care about evil things, whether it's, this kind of callous not caring about the harms of racism, or actively wanting to participate in racism. And so it's a very seductive worldview when you don't understand it, when you haven't taken the time to read it and then process what it says and then read it again. You kind of have to do that to get that. It's actually academically very shallow. It's compassion is, I don't want to say that it's necessarily cruel. I want to say, in fact, something much more specific is that what it has is it has way too narrow of compassion, with the compassion then turned way too high on that very narrow band. So what it's very good at is caring way too much about one very specific type of harm while being extremely good at ignoring all the other types of harm.
Yeah.
And that's an extremely important situation, because that's where you land in what C.S. Lewis is talking about, where he warns that the tyrant who believes they're doing it for your own good is the worst kind of tyrant.
Right.
That's where you land in that, where you have a very narrow sense of empathy turned up to volume level 11,
right,
and then that then overshadows and silences the ability to care about anything else. So if you care, we have to care about racism, we have to care about black people, or whatever they say, turn that up so loud that they can no longer hear the damage that they're doing to other people or other circumstances, or letting institutions fall apart, tearing churches apart, driving people crazy, accusing people falsely of racism and destroying their lives. No longer is any of that relevant to them, because their empathy or their compassion has been narrowed to a very, very, very small band that they then make so loud they can't hear any problem outside of that band. And I've argued, and I know it's very controversial, but I'm quite confident that this is correct, that particular pattern, and I don't say that it's going to bear fruit, but that particular pattern is the seed from which a genocide grows. Because if you can only care about a very small band of problems, and you care way too much about them, and you can't hear the harm you're causing somewhere else, that's a necessary precondition. It's not a guaranteed conclusion, but it's a necessary precondition to being able to start to perpetrate something as horrible as a genocide. You have to not care about the harm that you're creating to be able to do that. And the easiest way to get there is by caring way too much about one specific harm to where you've now lost the ability to care about any other harm. And
Yeah.
critical race theory, I hate to say it, but it's true, is designed to make people continually drive into a smaller and smaller range of empathy. And we can talk about that. For example, you say, oh, it's about, you got the idea of like white fragility and white complicity and white privilege. And then what do? As soon as that's taken off and it's gotten, to the point where it's mainstreamed, now it's like, oh, there's brown fragility and brown privilege and brown complicity, and brown people are also inherently anti-black. So again, it goes from being all non-white races to no, we're going to narrow the range even further and implicate everybody else. So you can see that it's the theory is designed to continually narrow the range. And where critical race theory comes from, I know I said Derek Bell, who certainly was not this, but it got co-opted by his student Kimberly Crenshaw, who was informed deeply by the Combahee River Collective, which was it is queer black feminism, which is a very, very narrow, very, very specific ideology or kind of combination of ideologies. And that's what it will narrow to, is queer black feminists will be the only people who you are allowed to care about at the bottom of that game. And it will continue to narrow to that. And those people are the only thing that have a legitimate claim on suffering.